Each one of those skulls contains the information from one of these planets, including Earth. And the reason why there's a 13th skull is because the 13th skull contains the knowledge of all those planets.
For decades, scientists have tried and failed to explain one of the strangest mysteries on Earth. Now, after years of study, they believe they've finally solved the riddle of the 13 crystal skulls, leaving the world speechless. This is telling me that this is a single block of crystal. If it was multiple crystals, you would not see the splitting of light in this direction. So, this was made from a single piece. Yes. These shimmering human-sized skulls carved from pure quartz seem to defy logic. But long before laboratories and scanners tried to explain them, the first skull emerged not in a lab, but from the Earth itself. In 1924, deep in the steamy jungles of Bice, a teenage girl brushes away layers of soil until sunlight catches on something buried. A flawless crystal skull gazes back at her. One fragment of a legend that spans continents, and perhaps, just maybe, worlds. The legend of the 13 skulls. Long before scientists ever laid eyes on them, stories of the 13 crystal skulls were told around ancient fires. According to Native American legend, 13 life-sized skulls were created. Each one holds a piece of sacred wisdom about the origins, purpose, and destiny of humanity. The legend says that when the world reaches a moment of great crisis, all 13 skulls will be reunited. Only then will they speak and reveal their collective knowledge to guide humankind into a new age. Different tribes tell the story in their own way. The Navajo speak of star people who brought the skulls from the heavens as gifts to early humans. The Mayans believed the skulls were vessels of cosmic memory, recording every event that ever happened on Earth. The Aztecs saw them as bridges between the living and the divine. And the Anastasia claimed each skull contained a fragment of creation itself. 13 keys to unlock the mystery of existence. As time passed, the skulls were scattered across the planet. Some were hidden in temples. Others were buried in deserts, and a few were lost to jungles that swallowed entire civilizations. Some say they were placed deliberately, waiting for a future generation to find them. Others believe they were taken by conquerors and collectors who misunderstood their power and that their true purpose was forgotten. What makes this legend even more haunting is that according to some keepers, 12 of the 13 skulls have already been found. They're sitting quietly in museums, private collections, and sacred temples. Only one remains missing. The so-called Master Skull said to contain the combined wisdom of all the others. For skeptics, it's a romantic myth, a story spun from superstition and wishful thinking. But for believers, it's a countdown. Because if the prophecy is true, the final skull's discovery could change everything we think we know about human history and about ourselves. And it all began with one girl deep in the jungles of Bice who stumbled on what would become the most famous crystal skull of all time. The discovery that started it all, the Mitchell-Hedges skull. It began with an expedition that was supposed to uncover a lost city, not rewrite history. In 1924, British adventurer Frederick Mitchell-Hedges set out for the dense, humid jungles of what was then British Honduras, now Bice. He was chasing the ruins of an ancient Mayan city called Lubentun, or the City of Fallen Stones. What he didn't realize was that his greatest discovery would come from his teenage daughter, Anna. Anna had grown up on her father's wild tales of lost civilizations and mythical treasures. On her 17th birthday, she wandered through the half-cleared ruins. With sunlight cutting through the leaves in thin golden ribbons, something gleamed beneath a pile of rubble. She brushed away the dirt and there it was, a perfect life-sized human skull carved entirely from clear quartz. Over the years, her story evolved. Some later versions claimed she was lowered by rope into a deep chamber or cave where sunlight caught the skull buried beneath the stones. That more dramatic detail appeared only decades after the supposed discovery, most likely as the legend grew and was retold in books, interviews, and documentaries. But regardless, it was said that the skull was flawless. Locals whispered that it was over 3,000 years old. It was supposed to predate even the Mayan civilization. When Anna lifted it into the light, its eye sockets shimmered with eerie brilliance. The skull seemed to glow from within. 3 months later, a separate jaw piece was found. And when the two were joined, the jaw moved as if alive. To the Mayan elders who assisted the dig, this was no ordinary artifact. They told Anna and her father that the skull had once belonged to a powerful priest, that it was an object used in sacred rituals to channel the will of the gods. Back in England, Frederick dubbed it the Skull of Doom. He claimed that anyone who mocked or disrespected it would suffer misfortune. And over the years, strange accidents seemed to follow those who did. But when scientists finally examined it decades later, they were even more baffled. In the 1960s, the skull was brought to the Hewlett-Packard laboratories in California for detailed testing. Under powerful microscopes, researchers expected to see the telltale marks of carving tools. Instead, they found none. The crystal was so smooth, so precisely shaped that one engineer remarked, "This is impossible." The skull appeared to have been carved against the grain of the quartz, a process that should have shattered it instantly, even with modern diamond tools. The team speculated that the only way to shape such an object would have been to use gentle friction, sand, and water for hundreds of years. One researcher guessed it could have taken several generations of artisans working their entire lives to complete it. Others thought it might predate all known civilizations. When light passed through the skull, it refracted in peculiar ways. Its lenses and prisms focused beams toward the eyes, making them appear to glow. Some said it was designed that way on purpose, as if whoever made it understood optics long before humans ever did. Rumors swirled that the skull could project visions, store information, and even communicate telepathically. Anna herself believed it had energy. She said it spoke to her through dreams. To many, it was a relic of Atlantis and proof that an advanced civilization once thrived on Earth and left behind a warning carved in stone. But not everyone agreed. Some scientists began to suspect the skull was a 19th century creation. A masterpiece of craftsmanship, yes, but not of ancient hands. Still, no one could explain how it was made or why its design matched no known culture. As the decades passed, the Mitchell-Hedges skull became a symbol, a bridge between myth and science, between the measurable and the mysterious. And as it toured museums and exhibitions, whispers began to spread. Because wherever the skull of doom appeared, others soon followed. They were eerily similar and every one of them claimed to be part of the same forgotten legend. That's when researchers began to wonder if one skull could defy explanation. What would happen when 13 of them were finally found? The Aztec skulls, Paris, London, and Washington. Not long after the Mitchell-Hedges skull made headlines, other crystal skulls began surfacing in museums and antique shops across Europe. Each was said to have come from ancient Mexico, carved by the Aztecs or Mayans thousands of years ago. And for a time, even scientists believed it. The first of these appeared in 1878 when a gleaming quartz skull was donated to the Musée d'Elm in Paris. It was labeled Aztec and was displayed proudly among pre-Columbian artifacts. Then 20 years later, another skull appeared at the British Museum in London. It too was said to be Aztec. The museum had purchased it from a French dealer named Eugene Bobin, who had a reputation for unearthing extraordinary finds from Mexico. Bonan's shop in Paris became famous for its mysterious crystal relics. Collectors from around the world flocked to see them, including buyers from Tiffany & Company in New York, who acquired one of his skulls in the 1890s for nearly $1,000. This was a small fortune at the time. From there, it made its way to the British Museum, where it still sits in a glass case today. Then in 1992, a third skull appeared. This time on the doorstep of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. No name and no explanation were given. Just a short note claiming it had once belonged to the former president of Mexico. When curators unwrapped it, they found an enormous crystal skull, heavier than any before. For a while, these three skulls in Paris, London, and Washington were hailed as evidence that the legends might be true. But when scientists examined them under microscopes, something didn't add up. Beneath their glossy surfaces were faint parallel grooves, the kind left by modern rotary cutting tools tipped with industrial diamonds. These were tools that didn't exist before the 1800s. Tests showed that the British and Smithsonian skulls were carved long after the Aztec Empire had fallen, likely in the 19th century Europe. The Paris skull, too, bore marks of modern polishing techniques. The supposed ancient relics turned out to be brilliant forgeries, not crafted by priests of a vanished civilization, but by skilled artisans catering to Europe's hunger for exotic treasures. Yet even with their authenticity shattered, the mystery only deepened. How had so many skulls nearly identical in size, shape, and material appeared in such different places? And why did so many people who came near them describe the same strange sensations? The chills, the visions, the sense of being watched. Skeptics dismissed it all as imagination. But believers claimed something far stranger. That even the fake skulls might have been part of a greater design and that they might be decoys scattered across time to protect the originals. If that were true, then somewhere out there the real skulls, the ancient ones, were still waiting to be found. Other known skulls and their mysteries. As the museum skulls stirred debate, more began to emerge from private collections. Each had its own bizarre origin story, and each added fuel to the legend of the 13 crystal skulls. Some were small and smoky, others were clear as ice, but all shared a strange sense of presence, as if the stone itself was somehow alive. One of the most talked about is Max, often called the Texas skull. Its keeper is a woman named Joan Parks, and she claims Max once belonged to Tibetan monks who used it in healing and meditation rituals before it somehow found its way to America. Parks says that when she's alone in her house, the skull speaks to her, not in words, but in feelings and images. She's even said that Max can predict illness, calm storms, and communicate with spirits. Scientists laugh at the idea, but to the thousands who visited it during tours across the US, the calm they feel in its presence is undeniable. Then there's Einstein, a crystal skull the size of a bowling ball and weighing over 33 pounds. Its guardian, Carolyn Ford, believes it was unearthed in Mexico in the 1920s and passed down through explorers before reaching her hands. She describes Einstein as a record keeper, a kind of living library that stores the memories of humanity. According to tests, the quartz emits measurable electromagnetic pulses, though no one can explain why. It's like the skull is recording everything around it. She says, like a camera that never turns off. Half a world away, another legend lives in the Himalayas. Known as Amar, the Tibetan skull is said to have been carried out of Tibet in 1959 when monks fled the Chinese invasion. Made of smoky quartz and weighing nearly 22 pounds, Amar was guarded by lamas who claimed it could access the Akashic records, a mystical archive of all human knowledge. It's said that anyone meditating before Amar could glimpse events of the past, even past lives. The monks risked their lives to protect it, fearing it could be used for harm in the wrong hands. And then there's the skull that few dare to speak of. This one is a mysterious quartz relic found in 2011 in the ruins of a Nazi officer's home in Bavaria, believed to have belonged to Heinrich Himmler himself. It is said the Nazis were obsessed with the idea that the skulls could channel supernatural power. If true, it would mean the myth of the crystal skulls reached even into the darkest corners of human history. From temples to laboratories, from Texas to Tibet, these skulls form a pattern too deliberate to ignore. The question isn't just who made them, it is why they were made. Each seems to hum with a quiet intelligence, as if waiting for something or someone to bring them back together. And if the legends are right, once all 13 are reunited, their true purpose will finally be revealed. Myths of origin from the gods or Atlantis linger across cultures. If you trace the stories of the 13 crystal skulls far enough back, you end up in a place where history and myth blur together. Every culture that mentions them insists the skulls didn't come from here, at least not from our time or our world. Among the Navajo and Mayan elders, there's talk of star people, luminous beings who descended from the heavens and gifted early humans the skulls as tools of wisdom and connection. In those stories, 12 of the skulls held knowledge from other worlds. The 13th contained the combined memory of them all, a sort of cosmic backup drive for humanity. They say that when the skulls come together again, the veil between worlds will thin and truth will be revealed to whoever listens. Other traditions point toward a different origin, and this one is buried deep beneath the sea. The legend of Atlantis, the lost civilization said to have fallen thousands of years ago, is tied to the skulls through psychic readings and ancient lore. Some believe the Atlanteans mastered crystal energy long before modern science discovered electricity. They built machines that drew power from quartz, and they didn't use it for destruction, but for healing, communication, and even space travel. According to mystic Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, the Atlanteans stored their most sacred knowledge in crystalline forms before their world sank beneath the waves. When they scattered across the globe, they carried that wisdom in objects that could endure. Among them were the crystal skulls. He claimed the survivors founded new civilizations in Central America, Egypt, and Tibet, each guarding a piece of the original power. Even the great inventor Nikola Tesla once said, "In a crystal, we have clear evidence of a living principle." To him, crystals were not dead matter, but a kind of living energy, ordered, conscious, and eternal. If that's true, perhaps the skulls aren't just carvings, but transmitters storing thoughts, frequencies, and maybe even souls. Modern science, strangely enough, has begun to circle back to these old ideas. In 2012, Hitachi unveiled a data chip made from quartz that could store information for millions of years. It's real technology that eerily mirrors what the legends described, data locked in crystal, readable by light. Perhaps the ancients weren't just carving symbols of death. Perhaps they were building devices for memory, a universal language written in vibration and light. And if so, the legend of the skulls may not be fantasy at all. It might be the echo of something long forgotten, maybe even a message from a civilization that mastered energy, consciousness, and creation itself. Science steps in with the tests that changed everything. By the late 20th century, fascination with the crystal skulls had reached its peak. Museums displayed them as sacred relics, spiritual movements treated them as conduits of cosmic knowledge, and popular culture turned them into icons of mystery and hidden power. But as the myths multiplied, scientists grew increasingly skeptical. They wanted data, not stories. In the 1960s and 70s, researchers began systematic testing. At the British Museum in London, experts examined the so-called Aztec skull, once believed to be a pre-Columbian masterpiece. Under microscopic analysis, the results were startling. Instead of the irregular curved marks that ancient stone tools would leave, the skull revealed perfectly straight grooves, cut so precise they could only have been made with modern rotary tools tipped with industrial diamonds, a technology unavailable before the mid-19th century. Similar examinations followed at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and the Musée de l'Homme in Paris. Each skull told the same story. The polishing was too consistent, the symmetry too perfect, and the surfaces too clean to have been shaped by ancient hands. The emerging conclusion was inescapable: these skulls were not the work of long-lost civilizations. They were likely European creations carved in the 1800s during a period when fascination with Mesoamerican culture and demand from wealthy collectors was at its height. Then came the most famous of them all, the Mitchell-Hedges skull. In the 1970s, engineers at Hewlett-Packard Laboratories used precision instruments to study its structure. The quartz was nearly flawless optical-grade crystal, the kind used in lasers and scientific equipment. The jaw was detachable and the balance so exact that it could rest evenly on any surface. To the naked eye, it was perfect. But under an electron microscope, the telltale signature appeared again: microscopic traces consistent with high-speed diamond-tipped carving tools. The implications were devastating for believers. If the skull was modern, then the grand tales of ancient priests, lost cities, and Atlantean engineers collapsed under scrutiny. Yet even the scientists who debunked its age admitted something astonishing: that reproducing such precision, even with 20th-century machinery, would have been extremely difficult. Whoever made the skull possessed not only modern tools, but an understanding of crystal carving far beyond what most artisans could achieve. For decades, debate continued. Were the skulls elaborate forgeries? Works of art misrepresented for profit, or modern recreations of something much older designed to preserve an ancient form? Then by 2025, advances in spectroscopy, 3D scanning, and atomic-level imaging allowed researchers to revisit the question with new tools. Teams at several institutions, including the British Museum and the University of Oxford, conducted nanoscale surface analysis to detect residue patterns invisible to earlier microscopes. These tests confirmed that the majority of known crystal skulls bore chemical signatures from 19th-century polishing compounds used in Europe, further supporting their modern origin. Yet, the story didn't end there. Some newly unearthed fragments, smaller crystal carvings found in Central America and verified through controlled excavations, displayed natural wear consistent with genuine pre-Columbian artifacts. These discoveries suggested that while the famous full-size skulls were modern, they may have been inspired by authentic older ceremonial objects now lost to time. In essence, science had solved the riddle, but not in the way anyone expected. The crystal skulls were not supernatural relics from an ancient civilization. They were human creations, products of artistry, myth-making, and desire. And that realization carried its own mystery. Why so many people across decades, even centuries, were drawn to believe in them? Because what the researchers ultimately uncovered was not just the truth about the skulls themselves, but about us. Our longing to believe in wonder. Our refusal to let mystery die, even when confronted by fact. In the end, the skulls didn't lose their power. If anything, they gained a new kind of significance, not as relics of forgotten gods, but as mirrors reflecting humanity's endless search for meaning in the unknown. The real mystery. In the end, what began as an archaeological puzzle became something far more profound. It turned into a mirror held up to humanity's eternal hunger for meaning. The mystery of the 13 crystal skulls isn't just about quartz and carving techniques. It's about who we are and what we long to believe. For scientists, the evidence seems clear. The skulls are modern creations crafted by talented artisans who fooled the world. But for millions of people, logic doesn't erase wonder. Even if they were carved in a workshop instead of a temple, they still ignite something deep within us. The sense that life is bigger, older, and more mysterious than we can comprehend. Perhaps the skulls don't need to be supernatural to be powerful. They remind us that humanity is forever reaching across time, across space, and across myth, trying to understand where we came from and where we're going. In their perfect symmetry, we see the impossible balance between faith and fact, between reason and imagination. And maybe that's why the story endures. Because every generation needs its relics of wonder. Something that invites us to look beyond the microscope, beyond the carbon dating, and ask the questions science can't measure. When the ancients imagined the 13 skulls coming together to speak, maybe they weren't talking about a physical reunion at all. Maybe the prophecy was about awakening and about each of us becoming ready to hear what truth sounds like when stripped of fear. The skulls never spoke. Yet they told us everything about ourselves, about our endless curiosity, our faith in the unseen, and our need to believe that something extraordinary might still be waiting to be found. Do you believe the crystal skulls were man-made masterpieces or something not of this world? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. We'd love to hear. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.